So as part of my new responsibility in the role of Director of Reconciliation, I've been asked to look at Yonge Street Mission from a theological perspective. And what is it that motivates us? What is it that we believe that makes us distinctive or unique? We all have a doctrinal statement. All your churches would have one. Your denominations have it. You might even have your own personal one. And we have one here at Yonge Street Mission. And our doctrinal statement that you sign every year is the basic tenets, the basic beliefs of the Christian faith. In fact, if you don't hold to that statement, because it's about as basic as you can be, you may not be Christian. I'm not judging, I'm just making it, but there's that statement there of what is it, what are the basics of our belief. But then everybody has their what we call the distinctives, or those things that make us different, or those things that we put the emphasis on. And so some churches would put the emphasis on the Holy Spirit, other ones would put it on the sacraments, and each one has their distinctives. And so what we're going to be doing over the next 8 months is looking at the distinctives of YSM. And what is it that motivates us? What is it that comes up from within us to do the work that we're called to do and to be this part of the body of Christ? And so we're going to be looking at 6 different statements. And as an introduction to them, just see if I can remember them all. Image of God, reconciliation, peace, justice, incarnation, and poverty. And so I'm going to be writing papers on these that you'll be able to download and look at and read if you so desire. In fact, it'd be exciting. Maybe we should do a Bible study on them or something. But at different staff meetings, I'm going to present those papers so that we have an idea. In fact, this morning we are taping this so that when new staff come on, they can go online and they'll be able to grab a hold of these beliefs that we hold to strongly as part of preparing for the ministry that's there before them. So first, a couple of quick comments. Theology is not a word to be afraid of. It simply means the study of God. You know, theo is God, ology, study of. So you have done all kinds of other ologies, and you actually do theology all the time, whether you realize it or not. Our pastor's son when they first came to church, he was 4 years old. And we call him the resident theologian because our pastor's always quoting him and his perspective on God at any given time. He's doing theology at his age. You are doing it constantly as well. So it's something that you shouldn't have to be afraid of. Secondly, it is always contextual. There is no way to do theology outside of who you are and where you are. Some have tried to make it objective, but it just doesn't work. And so when you read some of the long treatises of Augustine or Thomas Aquinas and the books and books that they write, they are still writing out of their particular context in time for their moment in history. And so when we are here at Yonge Street Mission, we are looking at doing our theology that is for Yonge Street Mission at this particular time and place in the history of Yonge Street Mission and the staff that are here and the community and where the city is at. And it's going to be shaped quite bluntly because I'm doing the first draft of it. It's a living document. We'll have chances to add, but I'll bring in all my baggage. And it will shape, and you will see parts and you go, well, that's just Bill. That's okay, because Bill has his theology, but it's something that we're going to do together in trying to discover what it is that makes Yonge Street Mission a living organism. Thirdly, theology must be practical. I was taking a course in the sacraments, and I went to the at U of T, and I went to the World Ecumenical Day. It was being celebrated all over the world, and U of T, Toronto School of Theology, is recognized as the most ecumenical seminary in the world. And in my naivety, I sat there waiting thinking we would take communion. And as the service went on, I'm waiting. I'm looking for the trays or the Eucharist and wondering which priest or whoever's going to serve it, and we never got to it. So I went and asked my prof, who is one of the leading ecumenists in the country. I said, how come we didn't have communion? I said, at Yonge Street Mission, we have 17 different denominations, and we have communion together. And he said, oh, we're not there yet. They've been talking and talking and talking about ecumenism, how the church is one, but they haven't got around to practicing it. And so theology is never good when all we do is talk about it. Theology has to have some action, and Yonge Street Mission is full of action. You can't say that you love God and neglect the little old widow next door. You can't believe God created the whole world and then choose not to recycle. You can't say that you believe the Bible and yet not read it and do what it tells you to do. It calls for us to respond with practical. Now, just so you're clear, this time is teaching, right? If I get preaching, I'll probably walk over here and start waving my arms. If you see that, push me back and we'll continue in this. So, from the... we're going to focus now on this idea of Imago Dei. There, you all know Latin now. Image of God. Very simple, right? My daughter laughs at me because I'm always making up Latin words. And she's been trying to study it for 5 years and now in postgraduate studies in Latin and struggling. And here I am thinking I can read Latin. But you guys know a little bit of Latin. So from the YSM website, Yonge Street Mission is called to demonstrate God's love, peace, and justice to people living with economic, social, and spiritual poverty in Toronto. And then here's this next line. As a not-for-profit Christian faith community, we acknowledge that every person is created in the image of God and has inherent value and dignity. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But that's something that's built within us. It's not something that we have to learn and be exposed to. There's that desire because we each, within us, want to be treated with dignity and respect. We all want to have value. We need to have our self-esteem, and we do anything to get it. So even in our most basic of natures, we understand this idea of dignity and value. For Christians, we locate it there in the teaching of the Scriptures that talks about being made in the image of God. The second statement that we have in our Articles of Faith, number 3, all people are created in the image and likeness of God. Every one of us has value and dignity and is full of promise and unique potential. Now, I'm not preaching, but if you yell out amen, I won't be offended. Okay, you are listening. So 2 stories. They both happened last week. In Starbucks, met Elizabeth in Starbucks, and we came out, and before we even got to the corner, there was this little old man sprawled out on the sidewalk. And I don't know about you, but I have seen it so often that, I automatically quickly judge. But we went over and we helped him get up. And he had his walker there, and I think his walker slipped on the ice or something. And he was as frail as could be. He was also filthy and unkempt. But after we got him up and sitting on his walker, he looked me directly in the eye and said, "Thank you." And then he did this bizarre thing. He kept on staring me in the eyes. And he had some of the most gentlest, kindest eyes that I've ever seen. And I could not take my eyes off of him. And at one point, this went on for maybe, when you're staring at somebody, it feels like it's a long time. So I don't know how long it was, but it felt like 2 minutes. But at one point, I felt like I was staring into the eyes of Jesus. They were so gentle. On Friday, 2 days later, I was heading up to the meeting that Angie mentioned earlier with the mission leaders, and I was crossing over from one side of Parliament over to the other side at Bloor. And I heard a voice call out to me, at least I thought it was calling out to me, and there standing next to me was a strong, very, very fit-looking man around the age of 30 with two of the wildest and craziest eyes I have ever seen. And I've seen a lot of them in my day. And he began to threaten and curse me and even made gestures to hit me while we were crossing the street. And then he just disappeared, like vanished. Like I tried to walk a little bit faster just in case, but when we got to the other side and I turned around, he was no longer there. It was... The image of God happens to be found in both those sets of eyes. That there in those two human beings that I had come across, who I've never seen before and may never see again, the image of God was there before me. To discuss the Imago Dei is to ask the question, what does it mean to be human? And what makes us distinct from the rest of creation? Is it genetics? Is it physical distinctives? Is it human consciousness, the mind and reason? Is it the ability to communicate at a high level? Is it this idea of the Spirit? And entering into the conversation of Imago Dei, ethical questions arise. And some of these you would have heard before, and some of them you're going, wow, I never thought of it as being part of this idea of the understanding of the intrinsic value of the human. And I only listed off a few, but the abortion, euthanasia, genetic engineering, robotics, assisted suicide, death with dignity, slavery, abuse, healthcare, salaries, religious freedom, cloning, torture, death penalty, sexuality, stem cell research, data chip implants. The list goes on and on. All have some impact or are defined by how we understand what it means to be human. Even RoboCop. And knowing what God is like tells us in part what we are like. We know that God is spirit. We know that God is powerful. We know that God is creative. We know that God is love. And we have some of those attributes at various levels within each one of us. And again, pondering on the image of God. Is it personality? Is it the 5, maybe 6 senses? Is it the emotions, the will, reason, spirit, morality, creativity? Are these all things that come together to make us what we describe as being fully human? And dignity is about empowerment and self-worth and value and significance, identity, respect, honor, position and place, confidence, esteem. It's about all those things that we desire for ourselves and for others. So we come to Genesis chapter 1. And in particular, God's been busy working, and after each day he makes the comment, that's good. And then on that 6th day, God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. First of all, the reason why God put Imago Dei at the beginning in that very first chapter was because God knows humans, And he knows that we pick up books and we read the first few pages and then we may not get any further. And so if there's nothing else in the world that you know about Scripture, you know Imago Dei. Conversely, I'm a firm believer that he put Revelation at the end of the Bible, hoping that nobody would actually get to it. Problem is too many of us develop our theology around Revelation and not around Genesis chapter 1. And so we have this contrast of how we view the world. And this view of the world continues on, that not just in Genesis chapter 1. It is only found 3 times in Scriptures, and they're all in the first 9 chapters of Genesis, this term of being made in the image of God. But it's there for us to understand and to reflect upon and to realize the depth of what it actually means to be made in the image of God. Adam is the word for humankind. It's also the name, but there it's used to describe this one particular part of creation. The only ones of all created order that were made by God in the form of God's likeness. The only ones that were given power over all the rest of the created order. The only ones that were commanded to be fruitful and multiply. The only ones who were not declared just good, but very good. I think there's a little smile on his face. Or maybe at this point he was beaming. The only ones we have the description about being made or formed from the earth, the dust, the soil, the dirt, the mud, ashes, the ground, the clay. That God stuck his hands in the mud, got his hands dirty, and took the time to shape and mold. It's described there in Genesis chapter 2, that God was intimately involved with God's whole being in the creation of humankind. And then after he molded and shaped us, he gives us life by breathing into us the Ruah, the Spirit, the wind, the breath of God. And we became alive. And male and female, sexual and relational. We are made to be in relationships. We are social beings. Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. The flood has happened. Noah, finally, the ark settles in the mountains of Ararat, and then Noah comes out and he offers sacrifices immediately. And then God makes a declaration about human life. And God is saying, it's now okay to kill animals, but not human life. I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God made humankind. In speaking these words to Noah, God declares a sacredness of human life that is over and above all other forms of life. Noah immediately sacrificed animals, but God pronounces that to take a human life is paramount to attacking God himself. We must note that God makes this statement after the fall, long after Genesis chapter 3. God is making this declaration. And so the image contrary to Augustine, Luther, and Calvin is alive and well. However, they are right in that it is nothing that humans have earned. The image is not something that humans do, but status that humans possess, who they are. And therefore, the image is not something that human beings can lose because of sin. It is grounded firmly in our being. Secondly, the other passages that we want to focus on is Psalm 139. Understanding fully that the Psalms are poetry, and we shouldn't base all of our theology upon poetry. But nevertheless, there is truth that's always found within the Psalms. And in particular, you know the passage. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me when none of them as yet existed. What does that do to you when you hear those words? I'm in awe. I'm stunned. I'm amazed. It blows me away. Like, I have this question. Where is that secret place? Where is God's workshop? Where He is shaping and forming and molding us and designing us special. And after He's put in all the human stuff in there, then He goes, and here's the Bill gene, and plants it in there. And here's the Bill personality, and plants it in there. And here's Bill without hair, and plants it in there. And then God looks upon it and He goes, that's very good. That every time God is creating another human being, it's special. Special to the point of saying it is sacred. That there is nothing that can take away the value of a human life, no matter what philosophy, no matter what perspective, no matter what experience a person has gone through, no matter what behavior they express. Nothing can ever steal away the image of God. The sacredness of each human life. So another quick story. Just last week, 2 female Muslim college students came to interview me for one of their school projects. And their final question was, why does Yonge Street Mission do all this? And I thought, I'll just appeal to their scriptures. And we talked a little bit about the sacred scriptures and the understanding that Muslims have and Jews have and Christians have and others, but those 3 in particular, about Genesis chapter 1 and this being made in God's image. And one of them said, even atheists cannot argue with that. Now they may try, but the argument of, because everybody has a declaration of the value of human life. So a picture, 2 pictures. You recognize these 2 individuals. Born less than 300 kilometers apart, 30 years difference in age, Mother Teresa, a saint. Everybody holds in high esteem, and we can see the image of God in Mother Teresa. But Slobodan Milosevic, nicknamed the Butcher of the Balkans, and was busy defending himself at The Hague in the Human Rights Tribunal for atrocities done to humankind, and died while he was defending himself in 2007. And yet both have stamped within them the image of God. Some of you were here earlier and we had some slides running through. And one of the slides said, Goliath was made in the image of God. It's something that no one can steal away. It's not always been true in society. It's still not always true. Not every society has it. Many of the ancient cultures did not have it. The Greek and Roman cultures didn't have it. Parts of the Persian Empire didn't have it. Some of it did. But certainly within the Judeo-Christian teaching, there is this understanding of intrinsic value. In the New Testament, the Jewish teachings of the Torah, including the creation story and the laws that protected the rights of all citizens and foreigners, are there for us. And there's the Christian teaching of incarnation, God becoming flesh, that reinforces the value of every human being. Being both divine and human, Jesus demonstrates that embodied human nature was not to be despised as evil, but embraced as worthy of divine redemption. I want to focus on a couple of different passages. Colossians 1, verses 19 and 20. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things. God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things. All things. Whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. That God, in understanding his great love for all of his creation, sent Jesus to be human, to be fully human, to be the firstborn, to be the image of the invisible God, and then was willing to sacrifice that image in order to experience the redemption of all of creation. Interesting quote I came across. You might recognize the gentleman. The Lord has redeemed all of us, with the blood of Christ. All of us. Not just Catholics. Everyone. Even the atheists. Everyone. I'm not talking necessarily about who gets into heaven, who doesn't get into heaven. We're talking about the depth of God's love and the possibility of understanding just how far that love goes and the power of redemption for the world and creation. Colossians chapter 3, verses 9 through to 11. You have stripped off the old self with its practices and have clothed yourself with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its Creator. In that renewal, there is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free, but Christ is all and in all. And this is not about Christians, this is about the created order. The renewal is a return to creation. That Christ has come to remove all the barriers. And later on, another month, we're going to talk about reconciliation. But the barriers have been removed that we use to separate and segregate the caste systems of our world, whether it be race or whether it be economics or whether it be education or whether it be physical health or whether it be age or whether it be gender. All those barriers have been removed by the work of Christ. The image of God dwells within each. Because Christ died for all of humanity, every person of every gender, creed, culture, and station in life has complete dignity and is worthy of being treated with the utmost of love, peace, and justice. It's like we hold them delicately in our hands because of the preciousness of life. Well, there's implications for YSM, and we'll go through these quickly. Serving the community around us. Actually, I can't go through this one. I can't go through anything quickly. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And I put this together with Matthew chapter 25 because it says there that if we want to see the image of God, which is invisible, we look to Christ. And there we find the image of God. And Christ then says to us, if you want to see the image of Christ, if you want to see my image, you find it in the poor and the oppressed and the broken and the hurting and the suffering. You'll find it in those people that are in jail, whether they're guilty or not. You will find the image of God. Jesus tells us that the way to see him is to respond to the poor, the oppressed, and the needy around us. The image of Christ, the image of God, is found amongst the least of these in our city. The neglected child, the battered teenage girl, the violent young man in jail, the person off their meds acting bizarrely, the snarly senior demanding more food, the family in Canada illegally. In some ways, it's not so much them needing us as it is us needing them. We are so quick to say Christ in us that they will find Christ in us. But Jesus says, no, you'll find me in them. He messes up our thinking every time. Who is demonstrating Jesus to whom? Could it be that in our desire to see the poor transformed, we might actually be missing out on seeing Jesus? That the poor are a sacrament. The least of these. It's a mysterious paradox. In the hungry we find the bread of life. In the thirsty we discover the true vine. In the stranger we meet the Father. In the naked we encounter the Good Shepherd. In the sick we come upon the great Physician. In the prisoner we have the Advocate. The outward and visible sign cannot be any more obvious. And we need to look no further than to Jean Vanier, one of the great Canadian heroes, because he gets it. Secondly, implications for YSM. Transforming YSM as a faith community. We need to look at our hiring practices, our diversity in leadership, servant leadership, respect for others, Christian faith traditions, remembering to pray for one another, reconciliation at home as in amongst ourselves, being a worshiping community. By the way, that survey that 64 of you just filled out, God bless you, the number one thing that you appreciate about all the different events was the worship time. Demonstrating gratitude to each other and celebrating achievements together, which we'll do in about 2 minutes. Skip the next slide because we're short here, but implications for YSM and transforming Toronto. Can corporate identities being made up of because we partner with all kinds of different groups? Can corporate identities being made up of individuals exhibit Imago Dei, like one particular human being? Forms of human community and social solidarity exhibit the divine image at once differently and perhaps at a higher level than individuals alone. Everyone and every group could potentially become partners with YSM. The philosophy of we are one, we are inseparable from the rest of the city. Powers and principalities are also created by God and like us have the mandate, A, to glorify God, and B, to serve creation. All powers and principalities. I have a big long quote on powers and principalities, but we'll move past that one because I have the next one. Powers and principalities have inherent value. City Hall, Daniels Court, Brookfield Properties, TCHC, the Egyptian Coptic Church, Rema Christian Ministries, Our Lady of Lourdes Parish, the People's Church, Life Changers Church, got to get that in there. The local mosques, TD Securities, Harley-Davidson, Covenant House, the Scott Mission, Toronto City Mission, Urban Promise, Microsoft and Dell Computers, the Rotary Club, the Newark Cultural Center, U of T, Ryerson, George Brown College, Jesse Ketchum Public School, they are all powers and principalities, and they are all ones who we partner with because of the intrinsic understanding that we all have in the sacredness of the human life. So we have within us Imago Dei. Now it's our challenge to go and live it. Live out your theology.